When firefighter Jake Thompson returned from his final shift at Station 19 in Detroit, he thought the hardest part of his life was behind him. 22 years of running into burning buildings while others ran out had taken its toll, and the early retirement due to a back injury sustained during a warehouse fire seemed like a blessing in disguise. He had no idea that his own family would become his greatest nightmare. What started as his beloved sister Ashley's dream wedding would spiral into a web of deception that would drain his entire inheritance, destroy decades of trust, and ultimately bring federal agents to his doorstep. But Jake had no clue that the FBI had been tracking his family's activities for weeks, building a case that would shatter everything he believed about the people he loved most. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Jake Thompson's ranch-style home in suburban Warren, Michigan, casting geometric patterns across the hardwood floors that he had refinished himself during his first month of retirement. At 44, Jake carried the solid build of someone who had spent over 2 decades hauling equipment up flights of stairs and carrying unconscious victims to safety. His graying temples and the network of fine lines around his blue eyes told the story of countless nights spent breathing smoke and staring into flames that had claimed too many lives to count. The house felt different in retirement. During his active years, Jake had barely been home long enough to appreciate the quiet suburban street lined with mature oak trees and well-maintained lawns. Now, 6 months into his forced early retirement, he was still adjusting to the rhythm of civilian life. The silence that had once been a luxury now sometimes felt oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of lawnmowers and the occasional dog walker passing by his front window. Jake's injury had ended his career abruptly. While responding to a 4-alarm warehouse fire last winter, a section of roof collapsed, pinning him beneath burning debris for nearly 10 minutes before his crew could extract him. The resulting damage to his lower spine meant chronic pain and limited mobility that made firefighting impossible. The department's medical board had been sympathetic but firm. Jake Thompson's days of active duty were over. The transition hadn't been easy. 22 years of purpose, brotherhood, and adrenaline had been replaced by physical therapy appointments, disability paperwork, and the challenge of finding meaning in a life that no longer included sirens and emergency calls. Some days were better than others. The bad days brought phantom sounds of dispatch radios and dreams of people he couldn't save. The good days brought acceptance and the possibility of building something new. His most treasured possession sat in a place of honor on the living room mantel, a framed photograph from his graduation day at the fire academy, showing him standing, proudly beside his mentor, Captain William "Red" O'Sullivan. Red had been more than a captain. He had been a father figure who taught Jake not just how to fight fires, but how to be the kind of man who runs toward danger when others flee. Red had passed away 5 years ago from lung cancer, an occupational hazard that claimed too many good firefighters, but his influence lived on in every decision Jake made. The inheritance that would soon become the center of a family crisis had come from an unexpected source: Jake's great-aunt Margaret Thompson, a woman he had only met a handful of times during childhood family gatherings. Aunt Margaret had been the family eccentric, a never-married librarian who had lived frugally in the same small house in Grand Rapids for over 60 years. When she passed away at 89, most of the family expected her modest estate to be donated to charity or divided among distant relatives. Instead, her will contained a surprise that stunned everyone: $75,000 left specifically to Jake, along with a handwritten note that read, "To my great-nephew Jake, who chose a life of service over profit. Use this gift to build the peaceful future you've earned." The inheritance had arrived just as Jake was struggling with medical bills and the reality of living on a reduced disability pension. It felt like a miracle, a financial foundation that would allow him to pursue the woodworking business he had always dreamed of starting. Jake had been careful with the money, depositing it in a high-yield savings account while he researched business plans and equipment costs. He had already found a small workshop space for rent and had been pricing out the tools he would need to turn his hobby into a profession. The inheritance represented more than money. It was hope, security, and the chance to create something beautiful with his hands instead of just fighting destruction. His phone buzzed on the coffee table, displaying his sister Ashley's contact photo, a smiling picture from last Christmas where she wore the red sweater their mother had knitted for her. At 38, Ashley had always been the baby of the family, 6 years younger than Jake, and blessed with the kind of natural charm that made everyone want to protect and help her. She worked as a dental hygienist in downtown Detroit and had been dating her boyfriend Connor for almost 3 years. "Hey, Ash," Jake answered, settling into his favorite recliner, the one piece of furniture that properly supported his injured back. "How's everything going?" Ashley's voice carried an excitement that was immediately infectious. "Jake, oh my God, I have the most incredible news. Connor finally proposed. And not just any proposal. He rented out the entire Detroit Institute of Arts for a private dinner last night. There were candles everywhere, and a string quartet. And when he got down on one knee in front of the Diego Rivera murals, I literally started crying so hard I could barely say yes." Jake couldn't help but smile at his sister's joy. Ashley had been hoping for a proposal for months, dropping hints about rings and venues with the subtlety of a fire alarm. Connor seemed like a decent enough guy. He worked in pharmaceutical sales and appeared genuinely devoted to Ashley, though Jake had always found him a bit too polished, too eager to impress with expensive gestures and name-brand everything. "That's fantastic, Ash. I'm really happy for you. Connor's a lucky guy." Jake paused, then added, "Though renting out the entire DIA seems like overkill. You would have said yes if he proposed in a parking lot." Ashley laughed, the sound bright and carefree. I know, but Jake, that's just how Connor is. He says I deserve the fairy tale. And honestly, after watching all my friends settle for mediocre guys who propose with rings from the mall, it feels amazing to be with someone who goes all out for the woman he loves." Something in Ashley's tone made Jake slightly uncomfortable, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Maybe it was the emphasis on expensive gestures, or the implied criticism of her friends' relationships. But it felt like Ashley was measuring love by the size of the gesture rather than the sincerity behind it. "So when's the big day?" Jake asked, steering the conversation toward safer ground. "Well, that's actually why I'm calling," Ashley said, her voice taking on a slightly different quality. "We've decided to have the wedding this fall, October 15th. To be exact. I know it's only 5 months away, but Connor found this absolutely perfect venue that had a last-minute cancellation, and we just had to grab it." Jake raised an eyebrow, though Ashley couldn't see it through the phone. 5 months is pretty quick planning for a wedding. Are you sure you don't want more time to organize everything properly? "That's the thing," Ashley continued, her words coming faster now. "The venue is the Meadowbrook Hall in Rochester Hills. You know, the mansion where they film all those fancy events? It's absolutely gorgeous, with gardens and ballrooms, and everything looks like something out of a movie. But they want a 50% deposit by next month to hold the date." Jake had heard of Meadowbrook Hall. It was one of the most expensive wedding venues in the Detroit area, the kind of place where celebrities and wealthy business families held their celebrations. The fact that Connor and Ashley were even considering such a venue suggested they were planning something far beyond a typical middle-class wedding. "That sounds expensive," Jake said carefully. "What kind of budget are you two working with?" There was a pause, and Jake could almost hear Ashley choosing her words carefully. "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. The venue alone is $40,000, and that's before we add flowers, catering, photography, music, all the details that make a wedding special. We're looking at probably $120,000 total for everything we want." Jake nearly choked on the coffee he had been sipping. $120,000? "Ashley, that's more than most people make in 2 years. Are you and Connor really sure you need to spend that much on one day? I know it sounds like a lot, Ashley said quickly. But Jake, this is my one chance at a dream wedding. I've been planning this since I was a little girl, looking at magazines and Pinterest boards and imagining my perfect day. Connor says I deserve to have everything I've ever wanted. And honestly, after all the stress we've been dealing with lately, his job pressures, my student loans, everything. We just want this one perfect celebration. Jake could hear the emotion in his sister's voice, and his protective instincts kicked in. Ashley had always been the dreamer of the family, the one who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. If anyone deserved a beautiful wedding, it was his sister. But the numbers she was talking about seemed astronomical for a dental hygienist and a pharmaceutical sales rep. What about Mom and Dad? Jake asked. Are they helping with the costs? Another pause, longer this time, and Jake sensed that Ashley was building up to something he wouldn't like. Actually, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss with you. Mom and Dad are contributing what they can. They're covering the rehearsal dinner and some of the smaller expenses. But even with their help and what Connor and I have saved, we're still short about $30,000. Jake felt a familiar sinking sensation in his stomach, the same feeling he used to get when dispatch announced a structure fire with possible victims trapped inside. He could see where this conversation was heading, and he didn't like the destination. Ashley, he said slowly, what exactly are you asking me? I know you have Aunt Margaret's inheritance money, Ashley said in a rush. And I was wondering if maybe you could loan us the $30,000 we need. I promise, I swear on Dad's life, that we'll pay you back as soon as possible. Connor is expecting a huge commission from a pharmaceutical contract he's been working on, and we should be able to pay you back by Christmas, maybe even sooner. Jake sat in silence for a long moment, processing what his sister was asking. The inheritance money was sitting in his savings account, earning modest interest while he planned. His woodworking business, Aunt Margaret had left it specifically for him to build a peaceful future, and he had been looking forward to the independence and creativity that his new career would provide. But Ashley was his baby sister, the person he had protected and supported throughout their childhood when their parents worked multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. I don't know, Ash, Jake said finally. That money is my future. I was planning to use it to start my woodworking business, maybe buy a small house with a proper workshop. It's not just sitting there doing nothing, it's my retirement plan, but… Jake, this is just a loan, Ashley insisted, her voice taking on a pleading quality. You'd get every penny back with interest if you want. And think about it. This money could help give me the wedding of my dreams. Aunt Margaret loved our whole family, and I think she'd be happy to know her gift was helping create such a special day. Jake found himself torn between practical concerns and family loyalty. On one hand, $30,000 represented nearly half of his inheritance, money he couldn't afford to lose. On the other hand, Ashley had been there for him during his darkest moments after the injury, visiting him in the hospital and helping him navigate the complicated disability process. She had never asked him for anything significant before, and this was supposedly just a temporary loan. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. How much time do I have to think about it? Jake asked. Well, the venue needs the deposit by the end of next week, Ashley said. I'm really sorry for the short notice, but this opportunity just came up so suddenly. The couple who canceled had already put down a deposit, so we need to act fast to secure the date. Jake could hear tears in his sister's voice, and his resolve began to weaken. Ashley had indeed been his biggest supporter during his recovery, bringing him meals and keeping him company during the long, painful months of physical therapy. She had never asked him for anything like this before, and the wedding was clearly the most important thing in her life right now. Okay, Jake said finally. Let me think about it over the weekend. I'll call you Monday with my decision. Thank you so much for even considering it, Ashley said, her voice brightening immediately. "Jake, you're the most amazing brother anyone could ask for. I love you so much." After hanging up, Jake sat in the quiet of his living room, staring at the photograph of Captain Red O'Sullivan on the mantel. Red had always preached the importance of family and looking out for the people you loved, but he had also been a practical man who understood the value of financial security. Jake wondered what his old mentor would have advised in a situation like this. He walked to his computer and logged into his online banking account, looking at the balance that showed $74,847 Aunt Margaret's inheritance plus the interest that had accumulated over the past few months. The money represented not just financial security, but the possibility of a new beginning, a way to build something meaningful with his hands after spending so many years fighting fires and destruction. But Ashley's words echoed in his mind. This was her dream wedding, her one perfect day. She had been there for him when he needed family support most, and she was asking for help during what she described as the most important time in her life. The money would technically just be a loan, and she had promised to pay it back by Christmas. Jake spent the weekend wrestling with the decision, barely sleeping as he weighed his options and tried to imagine the consequences of either choice. Monday. Morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that reminded Jake why he loved Michigan despite its harsh winters. He had spent the entire weekend consulting with his closest friend from the fire department, Lieutenant Sam Martinez, who had retired 3 years earlier and now ran a successful landscaping business. Sam had listened patiently as Jake explained the situation, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions, but mostly just letting Jake work through his thoughts out loud. "Look, brother," Sam had said over beers at their favorite sports bar Sunday evening, "family is family, but 30 grand is serious money. My advice? If you're gonna do it, make sure everything is in writing. Get a promissory note, set clear. Repayment terms, maybe even charge a little interest to make it official. That way everyone knows exactly what they're getting into." Sam's practical advice made sense, but Jake still felt uneasy about the entire situation. Something about Ashley's urgency and the astronomical cost of the wedding didn't sit right with his firefighter instincts, the same instincts that had kept him alive for over 2 decades in burning buildings. When something felt off during an emergency call, experienced firefighters learned to pay attention to that feeling. Nevertheless, Jake had made his decision. Ashley was his sister, and she had never asked him for anything significant before. The loan would be temporary, and she had given him her word that Connor's commission would allow them to repay the money quickly. He called Ashley at 9 a.m., just as she would be arriving at the dental office where she worked. "Jake," Ashley answered on the first ring, her voice breathless with anticipation. "Please tell me you have good news." "I've decided to loan you the money," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady despite his lingering doubts. "But I want to do this properly, with a written agreement and a clear repayment schedule." Ashley's squeal of delight was so loud that Jake had to hold the phone away from his ear. "Oh my God, Jake, you are literally the best brother in the entire world. I can't believe you're making this possible. Connor is going to be so relieved. He's been so stressed about the money situation." "Ashley, I'm serious about the paperwork," Jake interrupted. "This is a business transaction, even though we're family. I want a promissory note that specifies the amount, the repayment date, and what happens if there are any problems." "Of course, absolutely," Ashley said quickly. "Whatever you need." Connor actually mentioned that we should do something official anyway, just to keep everything clear and professional. He said his lawyer could draw up the documents if you want. Jake felt a small measure of relief. Connor's willingness to involve lawyers suggested that he was taking the loan seriously and understood the importance of proper documentation. Maybe Jake's concerns were just the natural caution of someone who had been trained to expect the worst-case scenario in every situation. "That sounds good," Jake said. "Have Connor's lawyer prepare the documents, and we can meet this week to sign everything and transfer the money." "You're amazing, Jake. I'll call Connor right now and get everything started. I love you so much. After hanging up, Jake tried to return to his normal routine, but everything felt different. He was now committed to loaning nearly half of his inheritance to fund his sister's wedding, and despite Ashley's enthusiasm, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had just made a terrible mistake. He spent the rest of the morning researching woodworking equipment online, trying to figure out how to adjust his business plans to accommodate the reduced funding. The call came Tuesday afternoon while Jake was at his physical therapy appointment. Ashley's name appeared on his phone screen, but when he answered, her voice sounded strained and rushed, completely different from the joyful tone she had used the day before. Jake, thank God you answered. I'm having lunch break, but I needed to talk to you about a couple of small changes to the wedding budget. Jake felt his stomach clench. What kind of changes? Well, it turns out the catering company we wanted has a minimum guest count that's higher than we originally planned, so we need to either invite more people or upgrade to their premium menu. And the photographer we really want costs more than we budgeted for because she's actually won some national awards and her prices went up. Jake set down the resistance band he had been using for his exercises and focused entirely on the phone conversation. How much more are we talking about, Ashley? The catering upgrade is an extra $8,000 and the photographer is another $5,000. But Jake, these aren't just random expenses. The catering upgrade includes an open bar with top-shelf liquor and a late-night snack service, and this photographer's work is absolutely stunning. Connor says these details are what separate a good wedding from an unforgettable wedding. Jake felt anger building in his chest. Ashley, you asked me for exactly $30,000 because that's what you said you needed. Now you're telling me you need another $13,000? Where is that money supposed to come from? Connor is handling it, Ashley said quickly. He has some investments he can liquidate, and he might get an advance on his commission. I just wanted to let you know so you wouldn't be surprised if the final costs are a little higher than we originally discussed. A little higher? Jake's voice rose despite his efforts to stay calm. You're talking about increasing the budget by almost 50% from what you told me. Ashley, this is exactly the kind of cost overrun that turns into a financial disaster. It's not a disaster, Jake. Connor has everything under control. He showed me spreadsheets with all his investments and projected income. He knows what he's doing. Jake had heard similar reassurances from fire victims who insisted they had everything under control, even as their homes burned down around them. Confidence and competence were not the same thing, and Ashley's blind faith in Connor's financial management was starting to worry him. I want to see those spreadsheets, Jake said. If Connor is so confident about his financial situation, he shouldn't have any problem showing me the numbers. There was a pause before Ashley responded, and Jake could hear voices in the background of what sounded like a busy restaurant. Jake, that's between Connor and me. You're loaning us money for the specific expenses we discussed, not becoming a partner in Connor's business decisions. Jake felt like he was being dismissed, relegated to the role of a bank, rather than a concerned family member with a legitimate interest in understanding how his money would be used. Ashley's sudden defensiveness was completely unlike her normal, open communication style, and it set off every alarm bell in his head. Ashley, I think we need to sit down together, all three of us, and go over the actual wedding costs line by line. If I'm contributing this much money, I want to understand exactly where it's going. That's not necessary, Ashley said quickly. Connor has everything organized in a planning binder with contracts and receipts for everything. I can show you the important stuff, but we don't need to micromanage every detail. Jake realized that his sister was being evasive, something she had never been before in their relationship. Ashley had always been an open book, sharing every detail of her life with enthusiasm and honesty. This new, secretive version of his sister felt like talking to a stranger. When can we meet? Jake pressed. I want to see the contracts and understand the timeline before I transfer any money. This week is really crazy with wedding planning and work, Ashley said. Can we maybe meet next week? I promise I'll bring everything and we can go through it all together. Jake didn't like waiting, but he also didn't want to pressure his sister if she was genuinely busy with wedding preparations. Fine, but Ashley, I want to see everything. Contracts, receipts, Connor's financial projections, all of it. This is too much money to handle casually. Of course, absolutely. Jake, I really appreciate how supportive you're being. Connor and I both know how lucky we are to have a family who believes in us. After hanging up, Jake sat in his car outside the physical therapy clinic, trying to process what had just happened. In less than 24 hours, Ashley had gone from grateful and transparent to defensive and evasive. The wedding budget had mysteriously increased by $13,000, and his sister was now reluctant to provide details about expenses or involve him in planning discussions. Jake decided to do some research of his own. He called Meadowbrook Hall directly and asked about pricing for wedding receptions. The woman he spoke with was helpful and provided him with a detailed breakdown of costs for a wedding reception for 150 guests, the size Ashley had mentioned. According to the venue coordinator, a premium wedding package would cost around $35,000, including venue rental, catering, and basic floral arrangements. Even with significant upgrades, Jake couldn't see how the venue costs alone would reach the $40,000 Ashley had claimed. His next call was to a photographer who specialized in luxury weddings. After explaining that he was researching costs for his sister's wedding, the photographer provided pricing information that seemed reasonable, expensive, but not the astronomical figures Ashley had mentioned. A top-tier wedding photographer in the Detroit area typically charged between $3,000 and $6,000 for a full day of coverage, not the $8,000 Ashley claimed they needed. The discrepancies in pricing made Jake increasingly uncomfortable. Either Ashley had been given dramatically inflated quotes by vendors, or she was not being truthful about the actual costs. Neither possibility was reassuring, and both suggested that Jake needed to be much more careful about how he proceeded with the loan. Wednesday evening brought an unexpected phone call from his parents. Jake's mother, Patricia Thompson, rarely called during the week unless something was wrong. When Jake answered, his mother's voice carried a tension he hadn't heard since his injury and hospitalization. "Jake, honey, your father and I need to ask you about something, and we want you to be completely honest with us." "Sure, Mom. What's going on?" "Ashley called us today asking for money for her wedding. She said that you had already agreed to contribute $30,000, and that Connor's family was putting in another $25,000. But they still needed an additional $20,000 from us for unexpected expenses." Jake felt his blood pressure spike. "She asked you for $20,000? She said something about the venue requiring additional insurance and security deposits because of the size of the event, and that the catering company had a contract clause that increased costs if the guest list went over a certain number. She seemed very upset and said that without our help, they might have to cancel the whole wedding." Jake realized that Ashley was now systematically approaching every family member who might have access to significant money. Her request to their parents represented a dramatic escalation from the original $30,000 loan she had asked him for, and the explanations she was giving didn't match the reasons she had provided to him. "Mom, what did you tell her?" "We told her that we don't have $20,000 to give away, and that we needed to talk to you first. Jake, your father and I are worried about Ashley. She didn't sound like herself, and some of the things she was saying didn't make sense." Jake spent the next hour explaining his conversation with Ashley and sharing his concerns about the inconsistent pricing information and her increasingly evasive behavior. His parents listened with growing alarm as the pattern of deception became clear. "Jake," his father said when he finished, "I think Ashley is in some kind of trouble that goes beyond just wedding expenses. The girl we raised would never lie to family or ask for money under false pretenses." As Jake hung up the phone, he realized that his sister's wedding planning had become something much darker and more dangerous than a simple case of overspending. Ashley was lying to multiple family members, inflating costs, and demonstrating a level of desperation that suggested she was trapped in a situation beyond her control. The question was no longer whether Jake should loan his sister money for her wedding. The question was what Ashley was really involved in, and how far she was willing to go to get the money she needed. Jake's unease transformed into active investigation mode Thursday morning. 22 years of emergency response had taught him that when multiple warning signs appeared simultaneously, it usually meant a situation was about to become catastrophic. He decided to take a more direct approach and drove to Ashley's apartment complex in Royal Oak, a trendy area popular with young professionals. Ashley lived in a converted loft building that had once been a textile factory, now transformed into upscale apartments with exposed brick walls and industrial fixtures. Jake had helped her move into the one-bedroom unit 3 years ago when she got promoted to lead dental hygienist, and he knew she was proud of her independence and financial responsibility. The rent wasn't cheap, but Ashley had always managed her money carefully and lived within her means. Jake climbed the metal stairs to the 3rd floor, noting the new luxury cars in the parking lot and the recent renovations to the building's common areas. Everything about the complex suggested it catered to successful young professionals with disposable income, which made Ashley's sudden financial desperation even more puzzling. He knocked on Ashley's door, hearing movement inside, followed by what sounded like hushed conversation. After several minutes, Ashley opened the door, looking surprised and slightly annoyed to see him. "Jake? What are you doing here? You should have called first." Jake studied his sister's appearance. She looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes and her normally perfect hair pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing workout clothes, but they looked like she had slept in them rather than exercised in them. "I tried calling this morning, but it went straight to voicemail. I wanted to talk about the wedding planning and maybe see some of those contracts you mentioned." Ashley glanced nervously back into her apartment. "Actually, this isn't a great time. Connor is here and we're in the middle of some important planning discussions. Could we maybe meet tomorrow instead?" Jake could see past Ashley into her living room, where he noticed Connor sitting at her dining table with papers spread around him and a laptop open. Connor looked up and waved, but his smile seemed forced, and he quickly returned his attention to whatever he was working on. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked. "You seem stressed." "Everything's fine," Ashley said quickly. "Wedding planning is just more complicated than I expected. There are so many details to coordinate, and Connor's been dealing with some work issues that are making everything more stressful." Jake's firefighter instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Ashley's body language, her reluctance to let him in, and the tense atmosphere he could sense from the apartment all suggested that his sister was dealing with problems she wasn't sharing with him. "Ashley, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I have some concerns about the budget increases. I did some research on wedding costs, and the numbers you gave me don't match what vendors are actually charging." Ashley's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "I called Meadowbrook Hall directly. They told me a premium wedding package for 150 SAO. Guest costs around $35,000, not the $40,000 you mentioned. And the photographer pricing you gave me is almost double what other luxury wedding photographers charge." Ashley looked back toward Connor, who had stopped working on his laptop and was now listening to their conversation. "Jake, every venue and vendor is different. Maybe you talked to someone who didn't understand exactly what we're planning. I spoke with the head wedding coordinator at Meadowbrook Hall and gave her your exact wedding date and guest count. She said no wedding package they offer would cost $40,000 unless we were talking about additional services that weren't part of the basic venue rental." Connor stood up from the dining table and walked toward the door, joining Ashley in the doorway. "Hey, Jake," he said with his characteristic smooth smile. "I think there might be some confusion about the pricing. We're planning a pretty elaborate celebration, with a lot of custom upgrades that aren't part of the standard packages." Jake had never particularly liked Connor, though he had kept his opinions to himself out of respect for Ashley's feelings. Connor was handsome in an artificial way, with perfectly styled hair and clothes that looked like they came from expensive stores. He had the kind of aggressive charm that Jake associated with salespeople who were more interested in closing deals than building relationships. "What kind of custom upgrades?" Jake asked directly. Connor's smile faltered slightly. "Well, we're doing some special lighting effects, upgraded linens, premium bar service, that kind of thing. The costs add up quickly when you want everything to be perfect." Jake realized that Connor was being deliberately vague, providing answers that sounded reasonable but didn't contain any specific information. It was the same kind of evasive communication Jake had encountered from accident victims who were trying to hide the fact that they had been drinking or speeding. "I'd like to see the actual contracts," Jake said. "If I'm contributing $30,000 to this wedding, I think I have a right to understand exactly where the money is going." Ashley and Connor exchanged a quick glance, and Jake caught something that looked like panic in his sister's eyes. "The contracts are at Connor's apartment," Ashley said. "We've been doing most of the planning there because he has a bigger table and better printer for all the paperwork." "Then let's go to Connor's apartment," Jake said immediately. "I have time right now." Connor shook his head. "Actually, I'm having some work done in my apartment this week. Everything's packed up, and it would be impossible to find anything. Could we maybe schedule something for next week when things are back to normal?" Jake felt his patience evaporating. Both Ashley and Connor were making excuses to avoid showing him basic wedding planning documents, and their explanations were becoming increasingly implausible. "Look, I'm trying to be supportive here, but you're asking me for a substantial amount of money and then refusing to provide any verification of how it will be used. That's not how business works, even between family members." "It's not that we're refusing," Ashley said quickly. "We just need a little time to get everything organized in a way that makes sense. Wedding planning creates so much paperwork, and we want to make sure we show you the right documents so you understand everything properly." Jake realized that Ashley and Connor were stalling, buying time for reasons he couldn't understand. His sister had gone from enthusiastic transparency to elaborate avoidance in just a few days, and Connor seemed more concerned with controlling information than planning a wedding. "Ashley, I need to ask you something directly, and I want an honest answer. Are you and Connor in some kind of financial trouble that you're not telling me about?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a structure fire, and Jake watched both Ashley and Connor's faces for their reactions. Ashley looked like she might cry, while Connor's expression hardened into something that looked almost angry. "That's a pretty insulting question," Connor said. "We're asking for help with wedding expenses, not because we're in trouble, but because we want to have a beautiful celebration, and we're willing to invest in making it special." Jake noticed that Connor had answered for Ashley, preventing her from responding to a question that had been directed specifically at her. It was a controlling behavior that Jake found deeply troubling, and it suggested that Connor was managing Ashley's interactions with her own family. "I wasn't talking to you," Jake said firmly. "Ashley, are you having financial problems beyond just wedding costs?" Ashley looked between Jake and Connor, clearly struggling with how to respond. "It's complicated," she said finally. "Connor's business has been really good, but some of his clients have been slow to pay their invoices, so our cash flow is a little tight right now. That's why the timing of the wedding expenses is tricky." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Ashley's explanation sounded like she was describing a situation where Connor was already spending money he didn't have, possibly using credit or borrowing against future income. It was exactly the kind of financial behavior that led to bankruptcy and destroyed families. "How much debt are you two carrying?" Jake asked. Connor stepped protectively in front of Ashley. "That's really none of your business. We're not asking you to pay our debts, just to help with wedding expenses that we'll repay as agreed." Jake realized that Connor was becoming hostile, treating Jake's legitimate questions as attacks rather than the concerned inquiries of a family member being asked to loan significant money. The defensive response suggested that the debt situation was probably much worse than Ashley was admitting. "Actually, it is my business if you're asking me to loan you money," Jake said. If you're already overextended financially, then your ability to repay the loan is questionable. We're not overextended, Connor snapped. I have a major commission coming in next month that will more than cover our expenses and your loan repayment. This is just a temporary cash flow issue. Jake had heard similar promises from countless people who were in over their heads financially. The big payoff that's just around the corner was usually a fantasy that desperate people use to justify continued spending while ignoring their mounting debts. What happens if that commission doesn't come through? Jake asked. What's your backup plan for repaying the loan? Connor's face flushed red. It's going to come through. I've been working on this deal for 8 months and the contracts are already signed. You're acting like we're trying to scam you instead of asking for help from your family. Jake noticed that Connor was using emotional manipulation, trying to make Jake feel guilty for asking reasonable questions about financial security. It was a classic technique used by people who couldn't provide honest answers to legitimate concerns. I'm trying to protect my sister and my own financial security, Jake said calmly. Those are reasonable goals that shouldn't threaten anyone who's being honest about their situation. Ashley finally spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake, please don't make this harder than it already is. Connor and I love each other, and we're going to get married whether we have your help or not. We just hoped that our family would want to support us during the most important time in our lives. Jake felt his heart breaking as he realized that Ashley was using emotional blackmail, making him choose between supporting what might be a financial disaster or being labeled as an unsupportive family member. It was completely unlike the straightforward, honest sister he had known his entire life. Ashley, I want to support you, but I need to understand what I'm supporting. If you can't or won't show me basic financial information, then I can't responsibly loan you this money. Connor put his arm around Ashley's shoulders in a gesture that looked possessive rather than comforting. Fine. We'll find the money somewhere else. Ashley doesn't need to be interrogated by her own brother like she's some kind of criminal. Jake realized that Connor was trying to end the conversation and get him to leave, probably so they could figure out their next move without family scrutiny. The urgency and defensiveness suggested that time was working against them for reasons Jake didn't yet understand. Ashley, Jake said, ignoring Connor entirely, if you need help with something other than wedding expenses, you can talk to me, but I'm not going to participate in whatever this really is until I understand what's actually happening. As Jake walked back to his truck, he heard Ashley's door slam behind him with unusual force. He sat in the parking lot for several minutes, trying to process what he had just witnessed. His sister was clearly involved in something that went far beyond wedding planning, and Connor seemed to be controlling both the situation and Ashley's responses to family questions. Jake decided to make one more phone call before heading home. He dialed the number for Connor's pharmaceutical sales company, claiming to be a potential client interested in their services. The receptionist was helpful and professional, but when Jake asked to speak with Connor Mitchell specifically, she paused. I'm sorry, but Connor hasn't been with our company for about 3 weeks now. He's no longer employed here. Can I connect you with another sales representative? Jake thanked her and hung up, his worst fears beginning to crystallize. Connor had been lying about his employment status, which meant his promises about commission payments were completely fabricated. Ashley was engaged to a man who was unemployed and apparently willing to lie to her family about his financial situation. The question was no longer whether Jake should loan money for a wedding. The question was how deep in trouble Ashley really was, and whether it was already too late to save her from whatever Connor had gotten them both involved in. The revelation about Connor's unemployment sent Jake into full investigative mode. That evening, he called his old friend Detective Lisa Warren from the Detroit Police Department, someone he had worked with on numerous fire investigation cases where arson was suspected. Lisa had always been thorough and discreet, qualities Jake needed right now. Jake Thompson, Lisa said when she answered. It's been too long. How's retirement treating you? It's been interesting, Jake said. Lisa, I need a favor, and it's personal. I think my sister might be involved with someone who's not what he appears to be. Jake explained the situation with Connor, including the false employment claims and the inconsistent financial information. Lisa listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions that revealed her investigative instincts, kicking in. Jake, what you're describing sounds like classic romance fraud escalating into something bigger. The unemployment lie is a major red flag. Give me Connor's full name and any other details you have. I'll run a background check and see what comes up. Connor Mitchell claims to work in pharmaceutical sales, drives a black BMW, probably around 30 years old. He's been dating my sister Ashley for 3 years. I'll call you back tomorrow, Lisa said. And Jake, be careful. If this guy is running some kind of scam, discovering his lies could put your sister in danger if he feels cornered. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to Jake's front door. Through the peephole, he saw a well-dressed woman in her 50s, carrying a folder and looking nervous. When he opened the door, she introduced herself as Margaret Chen, a financial advisor from a downtown Detroit investment firm. Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you at home, but I've been trying to reach your sister Ashley for 3 weeks about some irregularities in her investment accounts. She listed you as her emergency contact. Jake felt his stomach drop. What kind of irregularities? Margaret looked around nervously before continuing. Ashley opened several high-yield investment accounts with our firm 6 months ago, initially, depositing about $15,000. But over the past 2 months, she's been making increasingly large and risky trades, often leveraging borrowed money. She's currently down almost $40,000. And we're required to notify emergency contacts when accounts reach certain loss thresholds. Jake invited Margaret inside, his mind reeling from this new information. Ashley had never mentioned having investment accounts, and the idea of her engaging in risky trading was completely out of character for someone who had always been conservative with money. How much money are we talking about total? Jake asked. Margaret opened her folder and showed Jake several account statements. Between her various accounts and the margin loans she's taken out, Ashley is currently liable for approximately $65,000. The concerning part is that most of these trades were initiated by someone else using her login credentials. Someone else? Yes. The trading patterns and timing suggest someone with more experience was making the decisions. Ashley would come in occasionally to sign paperwork, but she seemed confused about the specific investments and often had to call someone for clarification before authorizing transactions. Jake realized that Connor had been using Ashley's name and credit to gamble with borrowed investment money, probably while promising her that his business expertise would generate profits to pay for their wedding and future together. Instead, he had buried her in debt that would take years to repay. Is Ashley legally responsible for these losses? Jake asked. Unfortunately, yes. She signed all the authorization documents, so from a legal standpoint, these are her debts. However, if she can prove that someone else was making unauthorized trades, she might have grounds for fraud claims against that person. After Margaret left, Jake sat in his living room trying to process the scope of the disaster Ashley was facing. Her unemployed boyfriend had not only lied about his job prospects, but had also used her identity to accumulate massive investment losses that she probably didn't even understand. The wedding expenses were just the tip of an iceberg that could destroy Ashley's financial future. His phone rang, displaying Lisa Warren's number. Jake, I've got information about Connor Mitchell and it's not good. Lisa's background check had revealed that Connor Mitchell was not his real name. The man dating Ashley was actually Connor Matthews, a convicted felon with a history of investment fraud, identity theft, and romance scams targeting financially stable women. He had served 2 years in federal prison for running a Ponzi scheme that defrauded elderly investors out of over $2 million. He's been using variations of his name and fake employment credentials for the past 5 years, Lisa explained. This isn't just a guy with money problems. This is a career criminal who specializes in financial fraud, and your sister is his current mark. Jake felt physically sick as the full picture came into focus. Ashley hadn't fallen in love with someone who made bad financial decisions. She had been systematically targeted, groomed, and exploited by a professional criminal who specialized in destroying women's lives for profit. "What do I do?" Jake asked. "Document everything, don't give him any money, and try to get Ashley away from him as soon as possible." "But Jake, be careful how you approach this. If Connor realizes that his cover is blown, he might escalate to more dangerous behavior. Men like this don't like losing control of their victims." Jake spent the weekend agonizing over how to approach Ashley with this information. He knew she was emotionally invested in Connor and would probably refuse to believe that their entire relationship was a criminal enterprise. Worse, Connor would likely have prepared her for the possibility that family members might try to sabotage their relationship with lies and jealousy. Monday morning, Jake decided to try a different approach. Instead of confronting Ashley directly, he would contact other family members to warn them about Connor's true identity and create a support network that could help Ashley when she was ready to accept the truth. His first call was to his parents, who listened in horrified silence as Jake explained Connor's criminal background and the investment fraud that had left Ashley owing $65,000 to financial institutions. "Our baby girl," his mother whispered. "How did we not see this? How did he fool us all for 3 years?" "Because he's a professional," Jake said grimly. "This is what he does for a living. He studies his targets, learns what they want to hear, and becomes whatever they need him to be." Jake's father was more direct in his response. "We need to get her away from him immediately. I don't care if she hates us temporarily. We can't let this criminal destroy her life." "It's not that simple, Dad. If we approach this wrong, Connor might convince Ashley that we're the enemies and isolate her completely. Or worse, if he feels trapped, he might hurt her." Their conversation was interrupted by Jake's doorbell. Through the window, he saw 2 men in suits standing on his front porch, both carrying the kind of leather folders that suggested official business. Jake told his parents he would call them back and went to answer the door. "Mr. Thompson, I'm Agent Michael Rodriguez with the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI. This is Agent Sarah Kim. We'd like to speak with you about your sister Ashley Thompson and her relationship with Connor Matthews." Jake felt his world shift as he realized that law enforcement was already aware of Connor's activities and had been building a case. The FBI agents were professional but grave, as they explained that Connor was part of a larger investigation into organized financial fraud targeting military families and first responders. "Your sister isn't Connor's only victim," Agent Rodriguez explained as they sat in Jake's living room. "We've identified at least 6 other women across 3 states who have lost a combined total of over $800,000 to schemes involving Connor and his associates." Agent Kim opened her folder and showed Jake photographs of Connor meeting with other men in what appeared to be surveillance photos. Connor is part of a network that specifically targets women from military and first responder families, using stolen personal information to identify potential victims with access to inheritance money, insurance settlements, or disability benefits. Jake realized that Connor's interest in Ashley hadn't been coincidental. He had probably researched Jake's firefighter background and injury settlement, Ashley's stable employment, and their family's financial situation before ever approaching her. "How long have you been investigating Connor?" Jake asked. "About 8 months, Agent Rodriguez said. "We became aware of him when one of his previous victims reported the fraud, but building a federal case takes time. We need to document the pattern of behavior across state lines and gather evidence of the organized nature of the operation." Agent Kim leaned forward. "Mr. Thompson, we know that Connor has been pressuring your sister for money, and we believe he's planning to flee the country soon. We've been monitoring his communications, and he's been in contact with people who facilitate fake identities and international money transfers. The revelation that Connor was planning to disappear, presumably taking whatever money he could extract from Ashley, added urgency to an already desperate situation. "What can I do to protect my sister?" "Don't give him any money, which we understand you've already decided," Agent Rodriguez said. "Document any contact you have with Connor or requests for money. And if possible, try to keep Ashley safe without alerting Connor that we're investigating him." After the FBI agents left, Jake felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. His sister was in love with a career criminal who was planning to steal whatever money he could get and then disappear, leaving Ashley bankrupt and emotionally destroyed. Law enforcement was building a case, but that could take months to complete. And Connor might flee before he could be arrested. Jake's phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley. "Jake, Connor and I need to talk to you tonight. It's important. Can you come over around 7? Jake stared at the message, wondering if this was Connor's attempt to pressure him for money one final time before disappearing, or if something else was happening. He texted back that he would be there, then immediately called Agent Rodriguez to report the contact. "Be very careful," Agent Rodriguez warned. "Don't go alone, and don't bring any checkbooks or financial documents. If Connor is planning to leave soon, he might be desperate enough to try something dangerous." That evening, Jake drove to Ashley's apartment with his friend Sam Martinez, following behind in a separate vehicle. They had agreed that Sam would wait in the parking lot as backup while Jake went inside, with instructions to call police if Jake didn't emerge within an hour. Ashley answered the door immediately, as if she had been watching for him. Her appearance shocked Jake. She looked like she had lost weight. Her eyes were red from crying, and she seemed nervous and fragile in a way he had never seen before. "Jake, thank you for coming. Connor and I really need to talk to you about something important." As Jake entered the apartment, he saw Connor sitting at the dining table with papers spread out in front of him. But unlike previous encounters, Connor's usual confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked like barely controlled panic. "Jake," Connor said without his normal false friendliness, "we need your help, and we need it tonight." Jake stepped into Ashley's apartment, immediately noticing the dramatic change in atmosphere. The normally tidy living space was cluttered with boxes, suitcases, and papers scattered across every surface. It looked like someone was either moving out quickly or preparing to disappear. Connor's panic was even more evident up close. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "Sit down, Jake," Connor said, gesturing to the couch. "We need to discuss some urgent changes to our timeline." Jake remained standing, keeping himself between Connor and the door. His firefighter training had taught him to always maintain escape routes in dangerous situations, and every instinct he had was screaming that this situation was about to become volatile. "What kind of changes?" Jake asked, noting that Ashley was hovering near Connor like a frightened child seeking protection. Connor took a deep breath, clearly struggling to maintain his composure. "There's been some complications with my business. Deals? Some clients have defaulted on their payments, and I'm facing some temporary cash flow problems that need to be resolved immediately." Jake realized that Connor was probably talking about his criminal schemes falling apart, not legitimate business problems. Either other victims had discovered his fraud, or law enforcement pressure was making his operations too risky to continue. "How? Does that affect Ashley's wedding?" Jake asked, though he suspected the wedding was the least of their concerns at this point. "We need to move the timeline up significantly," Connor said, his voice taking on an edge of desperation. "We've decided to get married this weekend at City Hall, and then take an extended honeymoon while I sort out the business issues." Jake felt his blood run cold. Connor was describing exactly the kind of quick escape that Agent Rodriguez had warned him about. The rush to marriage would give Connor legal protections and access to Ashley's accounts, while the extended honeymoon would put them both beyond the reach of law enforcement. "This weekend? That's pretty sudden," Jake said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Ashley spoke for the first time since Jake had arrived. "I know it seems fast, But Connor explained that, if we get married now, it will protect both of us legally while he deals with these business problems. And honestly, Jake, I'm tired of waiting for the perfect wedding. I just want to be Connor's wife. Jake could hear the exhaustion and confusion in his sister's voice. She had been manipulated and isolated to the point where she couldn't think clearly about the decision she was making. Connor had convinced her that a hasty marriage was protective rather than predatory. "Where are you planning to go for this honeymoon?" Jake asked. Connor and Ashley exchanged a quick glance. "We're thinking somewhere tropical," Connor said vaguely. "Maybe the Caribbean or South America. Somewhere we can relax and not worry about business pressures for a while." Jake knew that several South American countries had limited extradition treaties with the United States, making them popular destinations for financial criminals seeking to avoid prosecution. Connor wasn't planning a honeymoon, he was planning a permanent escape. "That sounds expensive," Jake said. "How are you funding this trip if you're having cash flow problems?" Connor's facade finally cracked completely. "That's why we need your help tonight, Jake. I need the $30,000 we discussed, plus whatever additional help you can provide. This isn't just about the wedding anymore. This is about Ashley's future security." Jake realized that Connor was now openly threatening Ashley's well-being as leverage to extract money. The subtle manipulation had been replaced by barely concealed extortion. "What do you mean by Ashley's security?" Jake asked directly. Connor stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. "I mean that the people I've been dealing with in my business don't accept excuses or delays. If I can't meet my obligations to them, Ashley could be in danger just by association." Jake felt rage building in his chest as he realized that Connor was either claiming to have borrowed money from dangerous people or threatening to involve Ashley in criminal activities that would put her at risk. Either way, he was using fear to manipulate both Ashley and Jake. "What kind of people?" Jake demanded. "The kind who don't care about explanations or family relationships," Connor said, his voice taking on a menacing quality that Jake had never heard before. "The kind who expect to be paid regardless of circumstances." Ashley looked terrified, tears streaming down her face as she listened to Connor describe threats against her safety. "Jake, please," she whispered. "Connor says if we can just get through this rough patch, everything will be okay. But if we can't come up with the money, I don't know what will happen to us." Jake realized that Connor had been terrorizing Ashley with stories about dangerous criminals who would hurt her if she didn't help him get money from her family. It was psychological abuse designed to make her feel responsible for her own safety and Connor's criminal debts. "Ashley, you need to listen to me very carefully," Jake said, looking directly at his sister while keeping Connor in his peripheral vision. "Connor is lying to you. There are no dangerous business partners. He's a career criminal who has been using your identity to commit fraud, and now he's trying to steal our family's money before he disappears." Connor's mask dropped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath his charming exterior. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled. "And you have no idea what you're risking by interfering with things that don't concern you. Ashley is my sister. That makes this my concern," Jake said firmly. Connor took a step toward Jake, his posture becoming aggressive. "Your sister is going to be my wife, which means her family obligations transfer to me. I suggest you remember that before you make accusations you can't prove." Jake had faced down armed criminals during fire emergency calls, and he wasn't intimidated by Connor's threats. "Actually, I can prove them. I know your real name is Connor Matthews, and I know about your federal conviction for investment fraud. I also know about the $65,000 you've stolen from Ashley through fraudulent trading accounts." The effect of Jake's words was immediate and dramatic. Connor went completely still, his face draining of color as he realized that his cover had been blown. Ashley gasped, looking between Jake and Connor with growing confusion and horror. "That's impossible," Ashley whispered. "Connor, tell him that's not true." Connor ignored Ashley entirely, his attention focused on Jake with laser intensity. How much do you know? He asked quietly. I know everything, Jake lied, hoping to provoke Connor into revealing more information. I know about your network, your other victims, and your plan to flee the country. Connor's expression shifted from panic to cold rage. Then you know that this situation is much bigger than just your sister's wedding expenses. And you know that there are consequences for people who interfere with ongoing operations. Jake realized that Connor was now openly admitting to criminal activities and threatening him directly. The charming pharmaceutical salesman persona was gone, replaced by someone who was clearly dangerous when cornered. Ashley, Jake said without taking his eyes off Connor. You need to leave with me right now. She's not going anywhere, Connor said, moving to block Ashley's path to the door. Ashley and I have legal commitments to each other, and family interference isn't going to change that. Ashley looked paralyzed, caught between her love for Connor and the growing evidence that everything she believed about him was false. I don't understand what's happening, she said through her tears. Connor, please tell me Jake is wrong. Please tell me you haven't been lying to me. Connor turned to Ashley with an expression that mixed manipulation with genuine desperation. Baby, your brother is trying to destroy our relationship because he's jealous of our happiness. Everything I've done has been to build a future for us. The business problems are temporary, but the money I need tonight will solve everything. Jake watched in horror as Connor continued to manipulate Ashley, even while his criminal identity was being exposed. Ashley, he's been using your name to steal money from investment accounts. He owes $65,000 that will destroy your credit and your future. That's not true, Connor said quickly. Those investments are legitimate business ventures that will pay off once the current cash flow problems are resolved. Ashley looked between Jake and Connor, clearly struggling to process conflicting information about the man she had planned to marry. Connor, show me the investment documents. Show me proof that what Jake is saying isn't true. Connor's response revealed the depth of his desperation. Instead of providing documentation, he grabbed Ashley's arm and pulled her closer to him. We don't have time for this. We need to leave tonight, before your family destroys everything we've worked for. Jake saw Ashley wince as Connor's grip tightened on her arm and his protective instincts overrode his caution. Take your hands off my sister. Or what? Connor challenged. You'll call the police? Go ahead. By the time they sort out what's really happening, Ashley and I will be married and long gone. Jake realized that Connor was right about one thing. If they disappeared tonight, Ashley would be trapped in a foreign country with a criminal who had already stolen her identity and destroyed her finances. She might never be able to return home or escape his control. Ashley, Jake said urgently, if you go with him tonight, you may never see your family again. Is that really what you want? For the first time, Ashley seemed to truly hear what Jake was saying. She looked at Connor with new awareness, noticing his aggressive posture and the way he was restraining her rather than protecting her. Connor, let go of my arm, she said quietly. We don't have time for this, Connor repeated, his grip tightening. We need to leave now. Ashley's voice grew stronger. Let go of me. When Connor refused to release her, Ashley tried to pull away, and Connor's response revealed his true nature. He yanked her back with enough force to make her stumble, his face contorting with anger. You're not going anywhere, he snarled. You're going to marry me, and your brother is going to give us the money we need, or you're going to find out what happens to people who don't fulfill their obligations. Jake had seen enough. Connor had crossed the line from manipulation to physical restraint and open threats. It was time to end this situation before Ashley was hurt or taken somewhere Jake couldn't protect her. Jake pulled out his phone and showed Connor the screen, which displayed Agent Rodriguez's contact information. Connor Matthews, you're under federal investigation for investment fraud, identity theft, and organized financial crimes. The FBI knows exactly who you are and what you've been doing. Connor's face went white as he realized that law enforcement was already involved. His carefully constructed world was collapsing, and his escape plan was falling apart in real time. "You have no idea what you've just done," Connor said, his voice filled with venom. "And you have no idea who you're dealing with." But Jake could see fear behind Connor's threats. The career criminal was finally cornered, and his options were running out quickly. The tension in Ashley's apartment reached a breaking point as Connor realized his criminal empire was crumbling around him. His grip on Ashley's arm tightened as he processed Jake's revelation about FBI involvement, and for the first time, genuine fear replaced the calculated confidence he had maintained for 3 years. "You're bluffing," Connor said, though his voice lacked conviction. "You don't have any proof, and the FBI doesn't investigate family disputes over wedding expenses." Jake kept his phone visible, Agent Rodriguez's contact information clearly displayed on the screen. "They investigate organized financial fraud, identity theft, and romance scams targeting military families. They've been watching you for 8 months, Connor. Or should I say, Connor Matthews?" Ashley's eyes widened as she heard Connor's real name for the first time. "Connor Matthews? Your name isn't Connor Mitchell?" Connor's face contorted with rage as he realized that his carefully constructed identity was being dismantled in front of his primary victim. "Names don't matter, Ashley. What matters is that your brother is trying to destroy our future together because he's jealous and controlling." "Let go of me," Ashley said more firmly, trying to pull away from Connor's grasp. "I want to hear what Jake has to say." Connor's response was to tighten his grip and pull Ashley toward the bedroom. "We're leaving. Now. Before your family destroys everything we've built together." Jake moved to intercept them, but Connor spun around with surprising speed, revealing a small knife that he had apparently been concealing. "Don't," Connor warned, pointing the blade in Jake's direction. "Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." Ashley screamed at the sight of the knife, finally understanding that the man she had planned to marry was capable of violence. "Connor, what are you doing? Put that away." "I'm protecting us," Connor snarled, backing toward the bedroom while keeping the knife pointed at Jake. "Your brother called the FBI, Ashley. Do you understand what that means? They're going to arrest me, and they're going to charge you as an accomplice because your name is on all the investment accounts." Jake felt his blood run cold as he realized that Connor was now using Ashley's potential legal jeopardy as leverage to maintain control. Even worse, Connor might be right that Ashley could face charges if prosecutors believed she had knowingly participated in the fraud. "Ashley won't be charged if she cooperates and testifies against you," Jake said, hoping to counter Connor's manipulation. "The FBI knows she's a victim, not a criminal." Connor laughed bitterly. "Victim?" Ashley signed every document, authorized every transaction, and received money from every fraudulent investment. She's going to federal prison unless she disappears with me tonight. Ashley looked between Jake and Connor with growing panic, finally understanding the scope of the disaster that had been building around her for months. "What investments? Connor, what did you make me sign?" "Nothing illegal," Connor said quickly, though his desperation was evident. "Just some high-yield investment opportunities that didn't work out as planned. But if the government gets involved, they'll twist everything to make it look criminal." Jake realized that Connor was still lying, even with a knife in his hand and his escape plan falling apart. Ashley deserved to know the truth about what had been done in her name, regardless of the consequences. "Ashley," he opened margin trading, "accounts using your identity and lost over $65,000 of borrowed money. He's been forging your signature on loan documents and using your credit to fund his criminal operations. That's why he needs our family's money, to cover the debts before the investment companies figure out what he's done." Ashley's face went white as the full scope of Connor's betrayal became clear. $65,000? Connor, I don't have $65,000. How am I supposed to pay that back? "You don't," Connor said, his voice taking on a frantic quality. "That's why we have to leave tonight. Once we're married and out of the country, none of this matters anymore. Jake watched Ashley's expression change as she finally understood that Connor wasn't trying to protect her. He was trying to escape justice and wanted to take her along as both a human shield and a continued source of funding. "I'm not going anywhere with you," Ashley said, her voice growing stronger. "Let go of me right now." Connor's response was swift and vicious. He grabbed Ashley's hair with his free hand and pressed the knife against her throat. "Yes, you are. We're walking out of here together, and your brother is going to let us go, or you're going to get hurt." Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with life-threatening emergencies, the same feeling he had experienced countless times when entering burning buildings to save lives. Every calculation in his mind focused on protecting Ashley while neutralizing the threat Connor represented. "Connor, you don't want to do this," Jake said, keeping his voice calm while slowly reaching for his phone. Threatening Ashley with a knife turns this from financial fraud into kidnapping and assault. "You're looking at decades in federal prison instead of a few years." "I'm looking at decades anyway if I stay here," Connor replied, backing toward the apartment door while maintaining his grip on Ashley. "At least this way, I have a chance to get away." Jake realized that Connor had reached the point of complete desperation, where rational thinking no longer applied. Men in Connor's situation often made catastrophically bad decisions that turned financial crimes into violent felonies, destroying any possibility of mercy from the justice system. As Connor reached the apartment door, Jake made his move. He had been slowly positioning himself for the past several minutes, and now he lunged forward, grabbing Connor's knife hand while simultaneously pulling Ashley away from the blade. The struggle was brief, but intense. Connor was in good physical shape, but Jake had 22 years of experience dealing with dangerous situations and the muscle memory that came from carrying unconscious people out of burning buildings. Within seconds, he had Connor pinned against the wall with the knife knocked away across the floor. "It's over, Connor," Jake said, maintaining his hold while Ashley scrambled to safety behind the couch. "You're done." Connor's response was to spit in Jake's face and snarl, "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. This is bigger than just me, and there are people who don't forgive interference." Before Jake could respond, the apartment door burst open and FBI agents poured into the room, weapons drawn and shouting commands. Agent Rodriguez led the team, quickly assessing the situation and directing his agents to secure Connor while checking on Ashley's condition. "Jake, are you hurt?" Agent Rodriguez asked as other agents handcuffed Connor and read him his rights. "I'm fine, but Ashley needs medical attention." Connor had a knife to her throat. Agent Kim knelt beside Ashley, who was shaking uncontrollably as the full reality of her situation finally hit her. "Ma'am, you're safe now. We need to get you checked out by paramedics, and then we'll need to ask you some questions about your relationship with Connor Matthews." As Connor was led away in handcuffs, he turned back toward Ashley with one final manipulation attempt. "Remember what I told you about the investment accounts, Ashley. You signed everything. You're just as guilty as I am." Agent Rodriguez stepped between Connor and Ashley. "Mr. Matthews, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it." After Connor was removed from the apartment, Agent Rodriguez explained to Jake and Ashley how the FBI had been tracking Connor's movements and communications for months. They had identified his pattern of targeting women from military and first responder families, using stolen personal information to select victims with access to inheritance money, disability settlements, or family wealth. "Ashley, we know that Connor targeted you specifically because of your brother's firefighter background and injury settlement," Agent Rodriguez said gently. "This wasn't random, and it wasn't your fault. Connor is part of an organized network that researches potential victims and approaches them with elaborate false identities." Ashley looked up from the blanket the paramedics had wrapped around her, tears streaming down her face. "How long have you known? How long has this been going on?" "We became aware of Connor's activities about 8 months ago when one of his previous victims in Ohio reported similar fraud. But Ashley, building a federal case takes time, and we needed to document the full scope of his criminal network before making arrests. Agent Kim showed Ashley photographs of other women who had been victimized by Connor and his associates. There are 6 other women across 3 states who lost a combined total of over $800,000 to schemes involving Connor's network. You're not alone in this, and you're not responsible for what happened to you. Jake felt a mixture of relief and rage as he watched his sister begin to process the magnitude of Connor's betrayal. Relief that she was safe, and the truth was finally exposed. But rage that a professional criminal had been allowed to systematically destroy his sister's life for 3 years while law enforcement built their case. "What happens now?" Jake asked Agent Rodriguez. "Connor will be charged with multiple federal crimes, including wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, and now kidnapping and assault. The financial crimes alone carry potential sentences of 20-30 years, and the violent crimes could add another 20 years. Agent Rodriguez turned to Ashley. "Ma'am, we'll need your cooperation to help us understand exactly what Connor did with your accounts and identity. We'll also need you to testify in court about his methods and the threats he made against you and your family." Ashley nodded weakly. "Will I be charged with anything? Connor said I signed all the documents and that I'd go to prison too." "No," Agent Rodriguez said firmly. "You're clearly a victim of fraud and coercion. Connor used sophisticated manipulation techniques to gain your trust and then exploited your identity for criminal purposes. You won't face any charges." As the FBI agents continued their work, collecting evidence and documenting the crime scene, Jake sat beside his sister and tried to comfort her as the full scope of her betrayal became clear. Ashley had lost not only her savings and her credit rating, but also 3 years of her life to a man who had never felt any genuine emotion for her beyond calculating how much money he could steal. "Jake?" Ashley whispered. "How did you know? How did you figure out that Connor was lying about everything?" Jake thought about the warning signs he had noticed. The inflated wedding costs, Connor's evasiveness about financial details, the desperate urgency about money, and the emotional manipulation tactics. Because he made the same mistakes that all criminals make when they think they're smarter than everyone else. He got greedy, he got careless, and he underestimated how much family means to people who actually care about each other. As the evening wore on and the FBI completed their initial investigation, Jake realized that while Connor's immediate threat was over, the long-term consequences of his crimes would affect Ashley for years to come. She would need therapy to recover. From the psychological manipulation, legal assistance to sort out the financial fraud, and family support to rebuild her life from the ground up. But for the first time in months, Jake felt hopeful about his sister's future. The truth was finally exposed, the criminal was in custody, and Ashley was free to begin the long process of healing and recovery. The weeks following Connor's arrest brought a complex mixture of relief, devastation, and gradual healing for the Thompson family. Ashley moved back into her childhood bedroom at her parents' house, unable to afford her apartment rent after discovering the true extent of Connor's financial destruction. The loft that had once represented her independence and success now felt contaminated by memories of manipulation and lies. Jake found himself in the unexpected role of family coordinator, helping Ashley navigate the maze of legal proceedings, financial recovery efforts, and psychological counseling that would define her immediate future. The inheritance money that had started this nightmare remained safely in his account, but its significance had completely changed. What had once represented his dreams of woodworking independence now felt like a shield that had protected his family from complete financial ruin. Agent Rodriguez had been thorough in his explanations of the legal process ahead. Connor Matthews faced a 47-count federal indictment that included wire fraud, identity theft, money laundering, investment fraud, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The charges carried potential sentences totaling over 60 years in federal prison, effectively ensuring that Connor would never again have the opportunity to victimize vulnerable women. The prosecution is confident about securing convictions on most charges, Agent Rodriguez explained during one of many meetings with the Thompson family. Connor's pattern of criminal behavior is well documented, and we have cooperating witnesses from his previous victims who will testify about similar schemes. Ashley's testimony would be crucial to the prosecution's case, but Agent Rodriguez was sensitive to her emotional state and the trauma she had experienced. We understand that testifying against someone you trusted is incredibly difficult, he told Ashley during a preparation session. But your courage in telling the truth will help ensure that Connor can never do this to another family. The investigation into Connor's criminal network revealed details that shocked even experienced FBI agents. Connor had been part of a sophisticated operation that used social media, public records, and insider information to identify and target women from military and first responder families. The network had developed detailed profiles of potential victims, including their family financial situations, recent losses or traumas that made them emotionally vulnerable, and social connections that could provide access to additional funding. They weren't just running romance scams, Agent Kim explained to Jake during one of their meetings. They were conducting organized psychological warfare against families who had already sacrificed for their communities. Connor's group specifically targeted military widows, injured veterans, and families of first responders, because they knew these families had strong loyalty bonds and access to benefits or settlements. Jake learned that Connor's interest in Ashley had been calculated from their very first meeting at a coffee shop near the dental office where she worked. Connor had spent weeks researching Ashley's background, learning about Jake's firefighter career and injury, their parents' financial situation, and even their grandfather's recent death and inheritance distribution. The romance that Ashley had believed was fate had actually been a carefully planned criminal enterprise. The financial recovery process proved even more complex than the criminal prosecution. Ashley's credit had been destroyed by Connor's fraudulent activities, and she owed legitimate debts to investment companies who had provided margin loans based on forged documents. While the FBI could prove that Connor had committed fraud, the companies that had lost money were still seeking repayment from anyone whose name appeared on the account documents. The civil litigation could take years to resolve, explained Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who specialized in fraud recovery that the FBI had recommended to Ashley. We'll need to prove that each transaction was unauthorized and that you were a victim of identity theft rather than a knowing participant. It's definitely winnable, but it will require patience and detailed documentation. Jennifer's firm worked on a contingency basis, taking a percentage of any money they recovered rather than charging upfront fees that Ashley couldn't afford. They immediately began the process of challenging every fraudulent transaction and filing identity theft reports with credit agencies, banks, and investment companies. The good news is that Connor kept detailed records of his criminal activities, Jennifer explained. Criminals like him are often obsessive about tracking their schemes, and those records will help us prove that you were a victim rather than a collaborator. During the third week after Connor's arrest, Ashley began seeing Dr. Sarah Martinez, a psychologist who specialized in treating victims of financial and romantic fraud. The therapy sessions were initially difficult, as Ashley struggled with feelings of shame, embarrassment, and self-blame that are common among fraud victims. Ashley, I want you to understand that what happened to you wasn't the result of poor judgment or naivety, Dr. Martinez explained during one of their early sessions. Connor is a professional criminal who spent years perfecting techniques to manipulate intelligent, successful women. The fact that he was able to deceive you doesn't reflect poorly on your character. It reflects his expertise at psychological manipulation. Dr. Martinez helped Ashley understand the sophisticated tactics that Connor had used to gain her trust and maintain control over their relationship. Love bombing, gaslighting, isolation from family, financial dependency, and graduated commitment were all recognized techniques used by professional manipulators to create psychological bonds that were difficult to break. Connor spent 3 years studying your personality, your vulnerabilities, your hopes and dreams, Dr. Martinez explained. He became exactly the person you needed him to be, and then gradually transformed your reality to serve his criminal purposes. Recovery means learning to trust your own judgment again, and recognizing that healthy relationships don't require you to sacrifice your family connections or financial security. The therapy sessions also helped Ashley process the guilt she felt about the impact Connor's crimes had on her family. She was particularly troubled by the realization that Jake had almost lost his inheritance money and that her parents had been prepared to sacrifice their retirement savings to help fund what they believed was her wedding. The people who love you were willing to help because they cared about your happiness, Dr. Martinez reminded her. They weren't fooled by Connor. They were showing love and support for you. Your family's willingness to help doesn't make them responsible for Connor's crimes. Jake found his own path to healing through action and purpose. He decided to use his experience with Connor's fraud to help other families recognize and avoid similar schemes. He began volunteering with veteran advocacy groups, sharing his story at financial literacy workshops and fraud prevention seminars. Financial. Criminals target our community because they know we value loyalty, honor, and taking care of family, Jake would tell audiences of veterans and first responders. They use our strengths against us, and they count on us being too proud to ask for help when something feels wrong. Jake's presentations included practical advice about recognizing romance fraud, protecting inheritance money, and involving family members in major financial decisions. He emphasized that asking questions and demanding documentation weren't signs of distrust. They were basic protective measures that everyone should take when dealing with significant money. If someone really loves you, they'll want you to feel secure and informed about financial decisions, Jake would explain. Anyone who gets angry about requests for transparency or documentation is probably hiding something that you need to know. The woodworking business that Jake had planned to start with his inheritance money evolved into something different but equally meaningful. Instead of focusing solely on custom furniture, Jake began creating memorial pieces for families of fallen first responders, donating his time and materials to honor those who had made the ultimate sacrifice. His first major project was a wooden memorial bench for the fire station where Captain Red O'Sullivan had served, carved with the names of department members who had died in the line of duty or from occupational illnesses. The bench was installed in the station's memorial garden, providing a place for current firefighters to remember their fallen colleagues. Red would have loved this, Sam Martinez told Jake during the dedication ceremony. He always said that our job was to build something good out of the ashes of destruction. The criminal trial began 6 months after Connor's arrest, and the prosecution's case was overwhelming. Agents Rodriguez and Kim had assembled a comprehensive collection of evidence that included financial records, forged documents, recorded conversations, and testimony from multiple victims across several states. Connor's defense attorney attempted to argue that his client had been involved in legitimate but risky business ventures that had simply failed to produce expected returns. However, the evidence of systematic fraud, identity theft, and victim targeting made such arguments impossible to sustain. Ashley's testimony was particularly powerful, as she calmly described the manipulation techniques Connor had used and the progressive isolation from her family that he had orchestrated. Her composure and detailed recollection of specific incidents helped the jury understand how sophisticated financial predators operate. Connor told me that my family was jealous of our relationship and that they would try to sabotage our future. Together, Ashley testified. He convinced me that protecting our relationship meant keeping financial information private from my family, even when they were being asked to contribute money. The prosecution also presented evidence of Connor's communications with other members of his criminal network, revealing the organized nature of their operations and their deliberate targeting of military and first responder families. One particularly Damaging piece of evidence was a recorded phone conversation where Connor bragged to an associate about hooking a firefighter's sister and described his strategy for bleeding the family dry before moving on to the next mark. After 3 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all 47 counts. Connor showed no emotion as the verdicts were read, but several of his victims, including Ashley, wept with relief as they realized that justice had finally been served. The sentencing hearing took place 2 months later, and Judge Patricia Williams imposed the maximum sentence allowed under federal guidelines: 58 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Judge Williams was particularly harsh in her comments about Connor's systematic targeting of military and first responder families. Mr. Matthews, your crimes represent a particularly callous exploitation of families who have already sacrificed to serve their communities, Judge Williams said during sentencing. You targeted people whose own service and honor made them vulnerable to your manipulation. The court finds your conduct to be among the most reprehensible examples of financial fraud it has encountered. Connor was also ordered to pay $1.2 million in restitution to his victims, though prosecutors acknowledged that most of the stolen money would never be recovered. Connor had spent the majority of his criminal proceeds on luxury items, gambling, and funding additional criminal schemes, rather than investing in recoverable assets. The civil litigation to recover Ashley's losses moved more slowly, but ultimately achieved better results than anyone had expected. Jennifer Walsh's firm was able to prove that virtually all of the fraudulent transactions had been conducted without Ashley's knowledge or consent, and several of the investment companies agreed to settle rather than face lengthy court battles. We've recovered about 70% of your documented losses, Jennifer told Ashley during a settlement conference. It's not everything, but it's enough to pay off the remaining debts and give you a fresh start financially. The settlement also included agreements from credit reporting agencies to remove all negative entries related to Connor's fraud from Ashley's credit report, allowing her to begin rebuilding her financial reputation. 1 year after Connor's arrest, Ashley felt ready to move back into her own apartment and resume her independent life. The dental practice where she worked had been supportive throughout her ordeal, and she had been promoted to office manager, a position that came with increased responsibility and better pay. I feel like I'm finally starting to trust my own judgment. Again, Ashley told Dr. Martinez during one of their sessions. I'm dating someone new, and this time I'm taking things slowly and keeping my family involved in major decisions. Ashley's new relationship was with David Chen, a teacher she had met through a volunteer literacy program at the local library. David was patient with Ashley's need for transparency and actively encouraged her relationship with her family rather than trying to isolate her from their support. The biggest difference is that David wants to spend time with my family and learn about my life before we met, Ashley explained to Jake during one of their weekly dinners. Connor always found excuses to avoid family events or tried to schedule conflicts so I couldn't attend family gatherings. Jake had also found new purpose and direction in the aftermath of Connor's crimes. His fraud prevention presentations had evolved into a consulting business where he helped financial institutions and law enforcement agencies understand how criminals target military and first responder families. Jake's work has been instrumental in helping us develop better screening procedures for detecting financial fraud targeting veteran families, Agent Rodriguez told him during a recent collaboration on a training program for bank security officers. The inheritance money from Aunt Margaret had ultimately served its intended purpose, though not in the way anyone had originally planned. Instead of funding Jake's woodworking business, it had protected his family from financial destruction and provided the security that allowed them to seek justice and healing. Jake did eventually start his woodworking business, but on a smaller scale and with funding from his disability benefits and consulting income rather than the inheritance. His specialty became memorial and commemorative pieces for first responder families, work that felt more meaningful than commercial furniture manufacturing. 2 years after Connor's arrest, the Thompson family gathered for Ashley's 30th birthday. a celebration that felt miraculous given how close they had come to losing her to Connor's criminal scheme. Ashley was thriving in her new relationship, excelling at work, and had become a volunteer victim advocate, helping other women who had experienced financial fraud. "I never thought I'd say this, but I'm grateful for what happened with Connor," Ashley told her family during the birthday dinner. "Not grateful for the fraud or the pain, but grateful for how it brought our family closer together and showed me what real love and support look like." Jake raised his glass in a toast to his sister's courage and resilience. To Ashley, who survived, something that would have destroyed a lot of people, and who chose to use her experience to help others, rather than letting it make her bitter or afraid. The case against Connor's criminal network continued to expand as federal investigators identified additional victims and co-conspirators across multiple states. Connor's conviction had provided crucial evidence for prosecuting other members of the organization, and several additional arrests had been made. "Your family's courage in coming forward and testifying helped us dismantle an entire criminal enterprise," Agent Rodriguez told Jake during a recent update meeting. "We estimate that Connor's network stole over $3 million from families across the country, and your sister's testimony was key to stopping them." The investigation had also led to policy changes at financial institutions, with new requirements for identity verification and suspicious activity monitoring specifically designed to detect the kind of fraud that Connor had perpetrated against Ashley and other victims. Jake's inheritance money remained mostly intact, earning modest interest while he considered how to use it in ways that would honor both Aunt Margaret's intentions and the lessons his family had learned from their ordeal. He was leaning toward establishing a foundation that would provide emergency financial assistance to families dealing with fraud recovery, ensuring that other victims wouldn't face the same financial devastation that had threatened his sister. "Aunt Margaret wanted me to use her gift to build a peaceful future," Jake reflected during a conversation with his parents. "I think helping other families recover from financial crimes and rebuild their lives would have made her proud." The foundation idea had grown out of Jake's consulting work, where he had met numerous families who were struggling with the long-term consequences of financial fraud. Many victims faced years of legal battles, credit repair, and debt repayment while trying to recover both financially and emotionally from their experiences. As Jake looked back on the nightmare that had started with a simple request for wedding money, he realized that his family had emerged stronger and more connected than they had been before Connor's crimes. The crisis had tested their bonds and proven that their love for each other was more powerful than any criminal's manipulation. Ashley had not only survived her ordeal, but had transformed her experience into a source of strength and purpose. Her work as a victim advocate was helping other women recognize and escape similar situations, potentially preventing countless families from experiencing the kind of devastation that had almost destroyed the Thompsons. "The most important thing I learned is that love doesn't require you to sacrifice your family, your security, or your values," Ashley often told the women she counseled. "If someone claims to love you but demands that you choose between them and everyone else who cares about you, that's not love, that's possession." Jake's own transformation from retired firefighter to fraud prevention consultant had given him a new mission that felt as important as his years of emergency response work. Instead of rescuing people from burning buildings, he was now helping families recognize and escape financial predators before irreparable damage could be done. The Thompson family's story had become a powerful example of resilience, recovery, and the importance of family bonds in overcoming even the most sophisticated criminal schemes. Their experience proved that while financial predators might be skilled at exploitation and manipulation, they were no match for families who were willing to fight for each other and seek justice for the crimes committed against them. Connor Matthews would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, his criminal enterprise dismantled, and his victims finally free to rebuild their lives. The Thompson family had not only survived his attempt to destroy them, but had used their experience to protect and help other families facing similar threats. In the end, Aunt Margaret's inheritance had indeed helped Jake build the peaceful future she had envisioned, not just for himself, but for his entire family, and for the countless other families who would benefit from the lessons learned through their courage in confronting and defeating a dangerous criminal who had underestimated the power of family love and determination. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.